Hi everyone. My name is Pavan, and if you've seen my previous videos, you would by now know that I'm trying to record videos of questions that could get asked during your front-end interviews. I'm trying to cover different areas. I've done few on React, and I've done quite a few on JavaScript. I'll stick to JavaScript for a few more sessions before I move on to React, and probably go into some lead code expected questions too. And I'll also try covering design sometime later on. Hopefully, all of this in the next 1 or 2 months. Cool. So let's get started with the one that I want to cover today. So the one that I want to do today is class names. It's a very common function, which you would be using in your day-to-day. It's a common utility function which you use in your day-to-day work. Like if you're using React, I'm pretty sure you might be importing the class names and using the class names for deciding when to add your class. If you're using Marco already has that pre-built, and you could just leverage that as part of your templating without having to import anything. And I think Svelte also comes with some of it. But in React, you always land up importing the class names utility and using it. But let's build that over here. So what we are going to implement is the class names is going to take an input. The input could just be a string, could be a number, could be an object, and could be an array. The goal is that if it's a number or a string, you just add that to the class name, uh, add that and return an string, which is delimited by space. If it's an object, you check for a truthy value recursively. You check for all types. And if it's a key value pair, which is just a Boolean, then you decide to use the key if it's true. If not, you're not going to use it. And if it's an array, you're going to concat all of it. It's important that you ask this to your interviewer on what are all the data types that you might get, because you could get map, you could get sets, you could get also symbols and other things. So just clarify it at the beginning. If they say it's just going to be string, number, objects, and arrays, which is what I assume they would, this is how we would go about implementing it. So let's start with the implementation. What you've got is args, which is an array. So let's first have an output. Let's hold an array. But what we're going to return is going to be a string. So you're going to join it with a space, which is what your end goal is, because all you want to do is give out a string which is delimited by space. Now let's see how do we go about implementing this. So because what we got is an array over here, so let's iterate through all of it. Args.length, I++, and let's get the arg, which is args.I. Right. Now, what you're going to check over here is that if arg is array, you always first check an array before checking for an object, because remember, array is an object too. Now, if we determine this is an array, there are two ways you can go about implementing it. What you can always do is you need to recursively call the class names again. So you could just do an arg.push and do the class names, call class names, and pass arg to it. This is one way of going about it. The other approach could be that you iterate through the array, which is arg dot for each the item, right? And you're going to do is object dot push, and you're going to call the class names and pass the item to it. I prefer this approach. Either of it can work. The earlier approach is probably much more simplified, especially for an interview where you have less of time. Now, after you're done checking for an array, you're going to check for an object, which is equals to arg, right? Now, in this case, what you need to do is you need to iterate through an object. And how do you do that? So for let, this is a much more efficient way. You could always use object.keys, but the efficient way is to do it this way, which is arg. The only drawback of doing this is that you need to check object if arg has own property, which is key. I guess P has to be capital. No, I don't think so. Why do we do this? Because remember that when you're doing for let key in R, you're iterating through the prototype chain of an object. When you check for an has-own property, you don't go through the prototype chain, you only go for the direct values. And what you're going to check over here is that if r.key is a truthy value, which is it's true, then you're going to push into the object just the key. Right? So this is if for an object, and this is the way you would handle it for an array. Now the next one is string. So if the type of r equals to string or type of r equals to number, right? So we want to cast in both cases to a number because we don't want to basically send back a number. We want to send a string. So what we're going to do is object.push arg. This is one way of casting into a number. There are other ways, which is arg to string. So there are 2 or 3 ways of doing it. The simpler way is just to concat it with a string, and JavaScript converts that into a string. And we have already returned the output. Let's do a dry run of the code and see if we are missing anything. This is one of the mistakes that I have done, is that I don't try doing a dry run of the code. I just try executing the code and then try debugging. It's good when you're doing that in your regular practice, but during interview, I would highly recommend that you do a dry run of your code and run through your code before executing. It just shows that you're taking care of your code and not just relying on the debugging. A mistake that I have done, and I do regret that. So let's try running, do a dry run. We did for let I args length. We check for an array, we check for an object, we check for a string and a number. For an object, we did object.push, and we called class names iteratively again by passing the value to it. And then for an object, we ensure that we don't iterate through, we don't try looking into the prototype chain. We only look for the direct values and look for truthy values and push the key. And string looks fine. I'm going to try doing a submit for this and see if it runs. So there was a failure. The failure says, okay, yeah, this is where I was a little scared. So it's the P is capital. Cool. So all the tests ran. So this is the code for class names. Thank you, folks. As I said, I'll keep recording more videos.